Chris, always good to talk with you. Before we even get into the NBA free agency stuff, I was asked a question yesterday that I want to ask you the exact same question, and it was from the PMT guys. Can you rank the Danettes for me, Chris?
Well, let's see. I mean, Paulie is my Vermont neighbor, but he's on my blacklist as of today. I would probably say Fritzy, Perloff, Seton, then Paulie, just because Seton continues to record all of my awful takes and
I think first of all,
ram them back down my throat.
their team was
Yeah, there it is. Yeah. So I would say that that's the case.
So wait, why is Paulie on your blacklist?
He knows it's a personal decision that I've made. I'm not talking to Paulie for at least a month, and I'm just going to go that. I'm just going to leave it at that.
Got it. All right. So I want to get into before we even get into the free agency stuff. I want to get your thoughts on the Chris Paul deal with the Houston Rockets. And I know everybody's talked about this. I'm not sure I really understand it. Every time I watch both the Clippers and the Rockets, Harden and Paul have the ball all the time. And it almost feels like, I know it's not directly relatable to football, but it almost feels like they've got two quarterbacks now. How's that going to work?
Well, I mean, it's a good problem to have. If you look at what the Rockets were last year, James Harden was both their primary scorer and he was their primary playmaker. And that took a big toll on Harden during the regular season, so much so that when you watched him against San Antonio in the playoffs and he didn't have any help facilitating, that was a big reason I thought San Antonio bowed out. Remember, they lost Game 6 on their home floor in a game without Kawhi Leonard playing for the other side. So that was a lot of that had to do, I think, with the fact that Harden had too much responsibility with the ball. Now you bring Chris Paul to the mix, another top 5 playmaker in this league, and you can spread the wealth a little bit. Now, I don't deny, Ross, that there'll be an adjustment period with this group. I don't think they'll get off to the fastest starts, but when you have these two guys and their skill sets and Mike D'Antoni, who is brilliant at devising offensive schemes for wing players, I think by midseason they're going to look like one of the best backcourts in basketball.
There's been so much said about it, Chris, but I wanted to get your thoughts and what you've been hearing on why Chris Paul picked Houston and maybe along with that, why he left L.A.
Well, I think that, look, a lot of the stuff that's been out there is true. The friction with Doc Rivers was something a lot of people in the league knew about all year. The friction with Blake Griffin was very real. I had talked to people that worked for the team and that played, former teammates that had told me that they would have been shocked if Chris Paul came back if Blake Griffin was there. Now, they didn't have that directly from Chris, but they were just using that based on their observations of what they saw. So, there was some truth to what's out there about the discord with Chris and the team. That being said, I think this was more about a desire to play with James Harden than it was anything else. These two guys have been all-star teammates. They've been USA Basketball teammates. They didn't just hatch this plan the last couple of weeks. This is probably something that's been going on for months, if not years, in at least conversations. And I think Harden saw a better opportunity to maximize his championship window playing alongside a guy who is arguably the best player in the game.
Chris, should we care about the nitty-gritty details? I mean, I just feel like, and I guess this happens in the NFL at times as well, but it almost feels like with this, it was because of his son and he treated his son differently. And maybe that's just, sports now and that's what we talk about. But on some level, it almost feels like we're going back and I feel like we're like junior high girls.
Yeah, I mean, there's a melodrama in the NBA that is swallowed up a lot of the narratives out there. I mean, whether it's LeBron and who he wants to coach him, or players, LaMarcus Aldridge, does he like playing with Kawhi Leonard? I mean, everything is more stuff is often about off the court than it is on, and that's the same thing that's true with the Clippers right now. Now, the Austin Rivers stuff, I'm not sure I buy altogether. I mean, the reporting out there is that there was some offer on the table from the Clippers that they could have made with the Knicks for Carmelo Anthony that would have involved Austin Rivers. I mean, that was never real. Carmelo Anthony was never going to the Clippers for this, Austin Rivers, Austin Rivers headline, basically bag of spare parts out there. It wasn't close to coming to fruition between those two teams. So that part of it I don't buy. But look, Chris played there 6 years. He played for Doc Rivers for a long time. Sometimes teammates, this as a former player, sometimes they just don't get along. And Chris was looking at this stage of his career for something different. For Houston, though, quickly on that, I mean, this is a big deal, but it's a big risk. I mean, they're probably going to pay Chris Paul, 4 years max dollars in his next contract, and they'll probably be paying a 37, 38-year-old point guard $40+ million on the back end of his deal. And as great of a player as Chris Paul is right now, I can't imagine him worth that money at that point of his career.
Talking with Chris Mannix from Yahoo Sports, The Vertical. What's the first free agent domino, Chris? Does it think it works that way, that we got to wait for Hayward, or we got to wait to see what happens with Paul George, and then this will happen? How do you think the dominoes play out over the next couple days, weeks, whatever?
Well, I think with Gordon Hayward, Gordon Hayward's the first guy to go. Gordon Hayward is the marquee guy that's going to be chased by Miami, Boston, and Utah. And a lot of dominoes fall immediately after that. Paul George could be dealt based on what Boston has left to offer. Could be dealt anyway to Boston if they ramp up their price to go and get him. And other teams, I think, will act accordingly. So I would put Gordon Hayward at the top of the list, but he might not be the first guy to sign. Gordon Hayward set up interviews already over the first few days of free agency. And when he does that, he might take a day or two after those meetings to make a decision. I mean, he's always struck me and people across the league as a guy that's really going to agonize over this. If he decides to leave Utah, it's not going to be an easy decision for this guy. He may ultimately decide on Boston, but it could be an agonizing decision. But I think he's the guy that leads to the next, the next series of deals that would happen across the league.
And then who's that? What's 2, 3, 4 you think most likely?
Well, I mean, if Blake Griffin is still unsigned, the teams that lose out on Gordon Hayward will ramp up their efforts to get there. I still believe that Chris Paul leaving makes it far more likely that Blake Griffin stays in Los Angeles, especially if they pony up a 5-year deal at whatever it is, $160, $70 million over the lifetime of it. That's real money for a guy that's been injury prone over the last few years, and he would be the man with that team. It would be his franchise now. It would take some rebuilding, and maybe they have to part ways with DeAndre Jordan via trade to upgrade the roster. But the idea of having his own team in L.A., I do think that matters to Blake Griffin.
What about the Knicks? For whatever reason, and there are teams like this in the NFL, Chris, that we just always have to talk about them. And the latest are these rumors with John Calipari. What do you think ends up happening with the Knicks, both from a front office standpoint and personnel?
Well, I mean, Calipari likes to be flirted with. He likes his name in the mix because it only helps him. It makes Kentucky more eager to keep him. It could mean more money in a new deal from Kentucky. And anytime you hear Calipari's name associated with the NBA, recruits see that. And they want to be associated with the NBA. They're going to Kentucky not for a 3 or 4 year education. They're going for help getting to the next level. And Calipari being attractive to NBA teams does that. James Dolan's kind of crazy, but I don't know that the Knicks owner would make that type of deal to bring Calipari to New York. Not after the Phil Jackson fiasco. He has to hire a real basketball guy at this point. Now, I'm skeptical he gets Toronto's Masai Ujiri, but I do think that David Griffin, the former Cavaliers president, is a real option here. Griffin, worked relatively cheaply in Cleveland over the last 3 years, has a good track record, and is eager to get back into the game. These factors, if they look like they have a good working relationship, I think that could work out.
Chris, how's the NBA's popularity right now? It feels like we talk about it more. People are more into it, especially in the offseason, when free agency starts and the Chris Paul deal and everything that's going on. But during the season, I don't feel like there's as much buzz. And obviously, a lot of teams seemingly have no shot right from the start. Overall, how's the health of the game in this sort of superstar, super team era that we're in?
Well, I mean, the NBA will be the first to tell you that they would love to have NFL-style parity. They would love every postseason to begin with 6 or 7 teams realistically thinking that they have a chance to win a championship. That's not the case right now, and that's not going to be the case probably for at least the next 3 or 4 years, as long as Golden State keeps that team together. But, look, the NBA, it has the best offseason in sports. It owns the offseason activities from the draft and the speculation there to free agency into summer league. No sport, including the NFL, has a better offseason than the NBA. So they've done a masterful job at making their sport basically a 10.5 to 11 month per year type of league, and that's good for the health of it. But as long as there's these super teams out there, it's going to hurt local TV ratings. It's going to hurt overall playoff rating, maybe not the finals, but overall playoff ratings, and it's going to be a net negative for the NBA. They know it. There's just nothing right now they can do about it.
Any surprises you see coming over the next couple weeks, Chris?
There's always something, and I'm keeping an eye on San Antonio. I mean, they convinced Pau Gasol to opt out of his contract, to leave $16 million on the table, to maintain some flexibility in signing a free agent. I think San Antonio could be in play for Kyle Lowry, the Toronto Raptors guard. I mean, Lowry can make the most money in Toronto, is basically worshipped up there, and that franchise is not afraid to spend money because they have a lot of it with that group. But San Antonio is lurking, and if I'm a guy like Kyle Lowry and I'm 31 years old, this is probably my last big contract, my last chance to win a ring. He just got broomed out of the playoffs with his best overall team by the Cavaliers, and look, that's got to be sitting in the back of his mind. I can go back to Toronto, collect a big check, or I could take a little less money, go to San Antonio, and see what I can do with the Spurs for the next few years. So that's the team and the situation I think is the most fluid right now.
Chris, thanks for the time as always, man.
Anytime, Russ.
All right, check him out on Yahoo Sports, The Vertical. Awesome breakdown by Mannix as usual.
The Dan Patrick Show, weekday mornings on Audience.